Should church musicians be paid to play in the church?
For the record.
Welcome to the Worship Leader Hangout podcast. We are so glad you're here. And today we're going to maybe touch a topic that might be a little touchy for some of you guys. It also might be a little intriguing for some that don't actually pay musicians. Maybe they're a worship leader that wants to or has never really thought about that. But we are wanting to answer the question, should church musicians be paid to play in the church? And I think what's going to happen is we're going to answer this question very quick in this podcast, and then we're going to be like, well, what are we talking about now? But we believe that there are some deeper topics, subtopics within this that we want to explain and go into. And what's up, David? It's good to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks, man.
As if you're a guest.
I'm
Sorry.
Glad to be back. And I'm glad to discuss this because obviously, right, we already know what our answer is going to be. And people may say we're biased. But I think we got biblical reasons for this. But I think I really want to get more into the attitudes and the spirit behind some of these things. Mm-hmm. And like I think we're going to talk about, not every situation is appropriate. And there is some nuances to this. But I'm excited to talk about more so the attitudes and some things churches really should begin to consider in regards to paying. I want to read a scripture. Can I do that?
Yeah, go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Absolutely. I pulled it up too.
So Nehemiah 13, 10 through 13, it reads this. I also found out that the portions of the Levites had not been given to them, so that the Levites and the singers who did the work had fled each to his field. So I confronted the officials and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their stations. Then all Judah brought the tithe of the grain, wine, and oil into the storehouses. And I appointed as treasurers over the storehouses Shelemiah the priest, Zadok the scribe, and Pedaiah of the Levites, as their assistant Hanan the son of Zakur, son of Mattaniah, for they were considered reliable, as their duty was to distribute to their brothers. All right, so what's going on here? Nehemiah is coming back to rebuild the walls, and he's realizing the walls of Israel. He's coming back to rebuild Jerusalem, and they're realizing like God's temple had been forsaken, right? And so the Levites, the people responsible for the music, the worship, the singing, they weren't working in God's temple. They were working in the fields. Why were they working in the fields? Because no one was paying them, and they had to go and actually do work so that they can get paid, right? So that's what's going on here. And so should musicians be paid? Well, yes, the Bible says you should pay them. And guess what? The Bible says you should pay your singers too, right? Okay. And so, but why? It's so that God's house isn't neglected. Okay. So that's the main thing. It's so that God's house isn't neglected. So it's, when I read this, I don't see this as a question of you have to pay them, right? Like that's what you're supposed to do. But you should do it so that God's house is not neglected. Now, so in terms of the question around should musicians be paid, clearly we believe that from a biblical standpoint. There are other scriptures that really support it, I believe, but I think this is really one of the strongest ones I've read. But I think there are some attitudes around payment that I'm more so seeing in the church today. And I don't think that, you'll come across too many people that will say no, musicians shouldn't be paid, right?
Right.
I think we're realizing, something. It is a craft
Mm-hmm.
that someone spent a lot of time working on developing,
Right.
and so we are paying for that craft, right? And so I don't think that's where the argument is today, but I think
Yeah.
one of the challenges I'm seeing today is musicians who say, I will only do it if I'm getting paid.
Hmm.
And there is some argument for them to be paid, certainly, but I don't know if that should be our attitude, right? Like, my attitude for serving God is I'm only going to serve God if I'm getting paid for it, right? So there are there's this relational thing going on. The church shouldn't really have this attitude that I shouldn't pay musicians, but musicians shouldn't have the attitude that I'm only going to do it if I'm getting paid. These people didn't neglect God's house because they weren't being paid necessarily. They were neglecting it because they couldn't take care of their families.
Right.
And Nehemiah wasn't holding the musicians and the singers responsible. It was holding the people that were responsible for taking care of the financial aspect of God's house responsible, right? And so, but we need to deal with this attitude of, I'm not going to play unless I'm paid. And I would say personally, I haven't battled that as much. What I have battled personally is, oh, I'm making less than that person. I'm making less than that person, you know? And so that certainly in the past has been a pride issue within my heart of, man, I can't believe like that church is paying this much and I want to go over there. I don't need the money, right? But I'm leaving for money, right? I'm not leaving the church I'm at because of any other reason, them not paying me something that's certainly fair. I'm just leaving for more. I'm and so
Yeah.
I think that is also another thing that we have to work out within our own hearts. Have you ever battled with some of that?
Yeah. So the first thing that you said that we see is, I'm not going to play here if I'm not getting paid. That's what I've seen the most,
Mm-hmm.
and directly was a keyboardist that I went all the way through the onboarding process, audition, interviews. I mean, all the way through. And he said, "So, I don't know if this is the right time, but how much do we get paid per week?" And I said, well, I mean, the ad itself. First of all, I want to say the ad said volunteer musician. So
Mm-hmm.
he found the ad and it literally said in the title volunteer musician, and then in the description, so we are seeking volunteer keyboardist, blah blah blah. Like we know we're gonna get not necessarily the greatest guys to or people to to audition. So we realize that, and so it kind of hit me in the face. I'm like, well, I'm just want to let you know, the ad said volunteer, and we are not able right now to pay our keyboardist. In fact, and I was open and honest with him. I said, right now the only position that is paid is our drummer, and I'm honest with you. I'm open with you about that because that's just how it is right now, and we want to open this up to other musicians as we can. And I'm actively working on this, but I can't put a date on it. I can't say, oh yeah, come join us, and
Mm-hmm.
eventually you'll start. No, I can't do that because that wouldn't be honest. Because I
Yeah.
don't know when that time would actually be. And so I battled that. I never heard from him again, which was unfortunate because he was really good and he had an awesome personality. So it made me wonder at that point. I was like, is this something I should be fighting for even harder? Because I really liked him and I liked his skill set, and I, in a lot of ways, yes, I really should be fighting for this a little bit harder because I want musicians that have are more talented. Just to put it out there raw, I want better musicians, and sometimes you have to pay to get the better musicians. However, I want their whole heart as well, and I don't know that we would have had his whole heart even if we did pay, simply because that was, one of the first things he asked as far as whether it was going to be a something that he did or not. So
Yeah.
that's what I dealt with, and we are closer to paying more musicians. I've actually had musicians say, if you do start paying this position, maybe put the money elsewhere or whatever. I said, well, we could give you the money and then you could decide to put it right back in the church. How about that? Those kinds of things. So I've had those musicians like, I don't want to be paid to play here. And they're good musicians. So I value what their statement. I value that, because now if they were terrible, I'd just like, okay, good. Thanks. But no, I'm blessed with amazing musicians that want to actually be here. And so
Yeah.
it makes me want to work for it even more. But anyway.
Yeah, I think, and that's a different attitude to have, because there is an attitude of, well, we don't pay musicians, right? And very rarely, look, as a church, ultimately you can decide like the quality of your music and what will facilitate best for you guys an atmosphere of worship, right? Like an atmosphere that helps you think about God's goodness and then respond to that, right? That's
Right.
worship. But so you have to decide that. I have just never seen it in an environment where it was like totally volunteer based and the musical quality was not a distraction.
I've it's very hard for me to say the same thing. Like I
I've
don't
nev-
see a full
Yeah.
volunteer situation where it's really, really good,
Yeah.
Maybe other
It's
than
either,
school, maybe like,
yeah,
in a university, and they're
yeah,
paying to be there.
and yeah, they're the ones paying to be there, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
they're trying to get something out of it. And so you certainly have to think, and a lot of times churches may have the attitude of, well, we know we'll at least pay the minister, right? Like the worship pastor, but we won't pay anybody else. Like,
And
and I, go ahead.
that puts the worship pastor in a very tough predicament, because he also wants quality, especially if he came out of our background and, how we learned. We're like, well, we want those musicians that we were peers with. How are we going to get those musicians? We're not.
Yeah, yeah. And so a church should think, how do we, like with anything you're thinking about, is how do I continue to develop this, to nurture this, to grow this? So like I do know that the general attitude is in a lot of churches, okay, well, we were able to hire a worship minister, we're good right there. Like we don't need to continue. But a growing music department is still continuing to say, how can we continue to invest in this? And maybe your investment dollars aren't going into musicians at first. Maybe your investment dollars are going into, I don't know, backing tracks at first, right? Like
Yeah.
that may be a value for you.
It's
in
funny.
helping
Let me interrupt that, because
that
you
I'm
could
saying that.
you could almost pay a musician for the amount of money that some people pay for backing tracks.
Yes.
Just something to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, add on the time that your worship leader or another person is sitting there editing or making those backing tracks.
Yeah.
Add that time up, and then take their salary amount or whatever, and figure out how much money you're spending per that, several hours of that creation.
Yeah.
So it's really, where do you want to put the money on? Honestly, these days, these
And I
backing
wanna
tracks
say
are
this-
$20-$30 a pop.
Oh gosh, the backing tracks are like 40 for us. Like
Yeah,
every time, 40 something. So I want to say this too. I'm certainly not anti in any sense of the word, um, a volunteer based musician. I'm more so like of a hybrid of like a combination, because I think when you're thinking in the framework of, well, let's pay everyone, and you're doing that for the sake of excellence, you forget some people, and like some people who may could develop the skill set to serve in that capacity. They just need to be in that environment, will never be in that environment. And then you're also not maintaining your pipeline for new musicians to develop for development, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think a church should be developing musicians, and at the same time maintain a good standard, a good quality for the worship service on Sunday morning.
Yeah, I like
And
that.
so that's where I lie. Um, but one other attitude. So there's the attitude of not paying musicians because, or no, the musician saying, I'm only doing this if I'm getting paid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a bad attitude to have, because we should do everything we do as unto the Lord, right?
Right.
And so that's from the musician perspective, and the church should never say, we don't pay musicians. But what I'm finding is there are churches that have this attitude of, we only pay certain musicians. And I know you're in that predicament, but
Yeah.
that's one I struggle with. And I'll tell you why. I have a buddy, and he's my example for this. No names, no church calling or anything like that. He has been faithful at his church, literally, when I say for years, I'm not talking like 2 or 3 years. I'm talking since probably inception, right, of the church.
Wow.
And the church, up until maybe the last 2 months, decided we're finally going to pay you. But
Him as the
this
worship
is the
leader?
thing, as a drummer.
Oh,
And
okay.
this is not
Oh,
a
wow.
small
Okay.
church, by the way. This is like
Really?
a really large church. And this is why I struggle with this one, is because anytime they needed a fill-in, there was no question on whether or not they would pay the fill-in. And so imagine you're off, you say, hey, I need to take some time off. And imagine what that does to a team member when you say, no, we don't pay you, who's faithful, but we're going to pay the fill-in on Sunday morning. Think about the morale that is doing to your members, your own members, when you do things like that. So churches should really be careful about that. And like, I'm very passionate about being upfront, right? And like, I know you have to be upfront with people that are coming onto your team, but I'm very frustrated when churches say we pay this person, but we don't pay this person. And now, I'm not as frustrated when you don't keep it a secret. But I am frustrated when you do keep it a secret.
Mm-hmm.
When this is like a secretive thing that we're doing. Well, we're going to pay this keyboard player over here. Hey, keep this on the hush hush. Don't tell anybody we're paying you this, right? When your team members find out in that regard, it's going to even be worse. At least my buddy stayed faithful to his church. First off, he loved this church. It's his church. He's not going anywhere. And at least they were honest with him. But the idea still behind paying fill-in musicians only is a challenge for me. When I know you can make, as a church, the sacrifice to say, hey, look, we're going to take care of our people as well.
Right. I went down that road for a year, roughly, and then I realized that, without any conversation with you about this, really, I mean, I realized, yeah, that's probably not a good idea. Let's just work toward, if we're gonna pay a fill-in drummer, let's just work toward paying our drummer as well. And we did, and I got that approved relatively quickly. And I first had it to where, I want to pay the drummer, bass player, guitarist, and keyboardist, and I submitted that, and it's just like, well, you need to pick one right now if this is what you want to do. It's like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Drummer, because that's a position that can like seriously make or break the sound. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
anything could really, but it's a little more difficult, I guess, to find it. I don't know. It was just my thought process, and so we're actively working on, okay, what's the next one? What's the next? Because I want to pay everybody. If you give me 100% decision making power, everybody on that stage will get something. Something. I don't care
Yeah.
what it is. If I can only give all of them $20, I'm gonna give them all $20. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it's yeah, that's not by no means what they're worth or what they're putting out, but it's just at least something to say thank you. Hey, thank you so much for the time you spent preparing for the, and thank you for the time you spent developing your craft over the years that you've done. And we didn't benefit from any of that, you know, but we are benefiting from it now, and we
Mm-hmm.
value that. So I would actually challenge churches if you can't pay like a going rate for a drummer or for musicians in general, give them something if you
Yeah.
want, if you have a heart to pay them, because they're going to be like, oh well, that's nice, that's gas. $50 a week is gas, right? To
Yeah.
get there for rehearsals, get there for the and then maybe a little over, a little more, depending on how far they live. If they're close, it's like, hey, got a few dollars in my pocket, you know.
Yeah.
But work toward it being the going rate, which we're still working toward that. Like I can say right now in October 1st, 2021, we are still working toward that, and I'll be super thrilled to keep you updated on that and how we're going with that, because it's definitely in my heart. I want to pay them, and I want to pay them all a fair wage, not just
Yeah.
$50.
And and I like that you guys, and that's the thing, right? Like churches, we are s- we are a body of believers that are still growing and trying to move towards honoring God more. And this is a step you can take. And I
It
think
is.
God blesses, I really believe God blesses these things.
Yeah.
There are two attitudes here. There's the attitude of the musician, and then there's the attitude of the church.
There's a third
And I
party that
think
I do want to talk about.
really,
Yeah.
well, I who's the third party?
So the third party are the people that have nothing to do with your church and are not your musicians, but kind of throw shame on you that you don't already pay your
Hmm.
musicians fully,
So these are
and
out.
like, no,
These are
you should
outsiders.
be. These are outsiders that are like, no, you should be da da da. Like we may even get them in the comments. No, you should be paying them all. Like you shouldn't even have a worship team without paying them. And they will throw shame on churches that want to do it, or maybe even ones that don't want to do it, and
Mm-hmm.
say, "Well, you're doing it wrong then." And I've just experienced that a little bit, and I'm like, "Well, I don't agree with that, because some churches really want to, and they are working toward it, but they just can't yet because the funds aren't
Mm-hmm.
there." And if you want them to, then you can always go to their website and click on that donate button and
Yeah.
help them toward that. But regardless, I mean, it's definitely an attitude I see. Maybe not as often as the two that you're
Mm-hmm.
describing, but it's definitely one that I see. And or ex church musicians would be like, no, all churches should pay $15 an hour for musicians to be there. I don't know. They some arbitrary number, and I'm just like, not all churches are equal. They're not all the same.
Mm-hmm.
Some make some bring in 400,000 a year. Some bring in 25 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's different. And the ones that are bringing in less, most of them, if you ask them, they would probably say, no, we want to reach more people.
Mm-hmm.
And probably a good portion of those churches are working toward that direction.
Yeah. The
So
the
don't
challenge
shame.
with
I
with
would say, yeah,
I was gonna say the
go ahead.
challenge with, you know how, okay, the the way we work is very different than how we should work as human beings or as people that like run an organization. What I mean by that is this: when we only deal with something when we have to fix a problem. What I And so let's say, for example, in regards to musicians, a church may only decide to start paying musicians when they have none, right? To me, that's
Oh, wow.
problematic
Yeah.
because what we do is we invest all of our time and energy into like problems rather than in putting our investments into like things that are working really well, right? If you have like a good volunteer musician base, believe me, you're not going to keep that forever. Like, if you have that
No.
right now, invest into that, right? Like, encourage that. Tell these guys, put some more responsibility on them and say, hey, man, we really appreciate what you guys are doing. What about a developmental program? Oh, by the way, we want to go ahead and start paying you guys. Like, invest into things that are successful already rather than thinking like, let me go and invest into a problem. And that's one of my frustrations is we invest in paying musicians when it's like we can't find anybody. So now we got to go ahead and invest into this. Like, invest into it ahead of the game, you know? And so
I could see
that was
that
one.
also. Yeah, I could see that also developing to a problem of, being desperate for musicians and
Oh, yeah.
not fully yeah, and not fully interviewing them and finding out who they are, and then you have a group of musicians that don't really care about the church. They're just there for the money.
Exactly.
So then you've
Yeah.
just added a second problem.
Yeah. Now
So
you're
yeah,
reaching
that,
for
that's a
musicians at the
really good
bottom of
point.
yeah. You're
Yeah,
reaching for the guys at the
that's a really
bottom
good
of the
point.
barrel. Um, so, and then,
N-
so I was talking
Not that
about
the
go ahead.
all I was gonna say is not that the big church should try to just say, "Hey, let's develop volunteers first." We're not saying that, but I get what you're saying. Like, yeah. Anyway, sorry, just thinking out
Mm-hmm.
loud.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, no. Yeah, all I'm saying is just invest into what's already working because that's going to continue to
Right.
thrive, right? Um, and so, but the other thing is, so there's two attitudes, right? There's the attitude of the church, there's the attitude of the musician, and both of those attitudes should be very different. They shouldn't be the same. And something I've been thinking about more lately is this is personal now. No one else has to adopt
Okay.
this because this may not work for you. I would like to reach the point in my own business where I don't have to be paid by the church for a
Oh
number of
wow.
reasons.
Yeah.
Because I want to be able to remove the money factor in how I serve God. I realize that money does taint your decision making into
Mm.
which church you work for. And sometimes you are willing to compromise yourself because the dollar sign is looking bigger over here, right? And you may be even willing to do it for good reasons. Like, I need to take care of my family and I don't have any money right now. And I have to say no to this church that I really like to go over to this church. And I'm not saying like look, I love my church. I'm not even trying to go anywhere. But I do realize how money does taint our decision making. And taint may not even be a bad thing, but I shouldn't even use that word. It affects our decision making. And I want to
Mm-hmm.
be free from that. I also want to know for my own self, with my own faith, that I'm not serving God because I'm getting paid. And so
Amen.
to to be confident in my own faith, like I want to reach that point outside of being paid from the church. And so that's kind of all I have to
I
say
got a
in regards to
solution for
this.
you. I got
Go
a
ahead.
solution for you. Let's just switch for 1 year, and then all your problems are solved.
Man, that takes too much work. For one, you know I ain't Pentecostal, so
Bro, you could stay in. Oh no, I can hold my own in a Baptist church now.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
was in the,
You could hold your
but
own in the Baptist, but ooh,
yeah,
some of that
yeah. You
that
come on. We'll just switch just for a year. And I'm sure Johnny could find work out in Texas, and
yeah.
Brooke can do her thing out here, and we'll just We'll call it Trading Spaces, Worship Leader Edition.
Yeah, trading
You could
spaces.
just stay in the
That's
house,
funny.
just feed the dogs. That's all, and the cats. That's all you got to do.
That's funny. But yeah, so you want me to sum this up, or you want to end this?
Yeah,
How you
I
want to
think
do
you
it?
did, man. You did. We have a few attitudes, and I think the best thing to do is um, if you are a musician and you feel like you are at your church and you're not going anywhere, but they're not paying, just start having the conversation. Not a heated conversation. Just start having the conversation, because your
Mm-hmm.
worship leaders and your the finance people, they want to hear your heart on it, and you never know what that genuine and kind and meaningful conversation could have, or could you never know what that conversation could go lead to, or anyway. And then also I would say, as for the worship leader that is in a position where the musicians aren't getting paid but they want to, you also have to start having that conversation and share your heart on the why. Like, why do
Mm-hmm.
we want? And what David said was so good, especially if you are in a position where you have some amazing volunteers. Let's start rewarding them in a way, or let's start thanking them, even if it's just like what I said, $50 a week for all of them. Like, let's start there. Let's start somewhere, but you have to share the why, and you have to share the heart of it, not just I think we should pay it. Like, if you go in like that, your finance people or your board, they're not going to receive that. But you
Mm-hmm.
go in with a pure heart, maybe even bring some Bible that you've studied, not just some random scripture. And I think they're going to start hearing you out, and you'll be surprised at how quickly you could make this happen. Of course, I'm still working toward that. So I'm not a full testimony of starting from no paid musicians to now full band. We still only pay one at this point, but we're working toward it. And our
Yeah,
finance
yeah.
team has a heart for that too now. And so we are seriously actively working in that direction. So I'm excited about it, but we're just not there yet. And then, don't shame worship leaders or churches that don't, whether they fully believe they should or not. It's just not a good place to be in. So yeah, that's the way I would sum this up. Um,
Cool.
and
Yeah.
and if you're in a position, if you're still listening for some reason and you still feel like churches should not pay musicians, well, more power to you. Good luck finding the musicians that sound really good. No, I
Yeah.
mean, but for real, just start thinking about it. That's all. Start praying about it. You never know. Um, but I'm not mad at you either. I mean, yeah, it just depends on the church. It depends on the situation.
Yeah.
So,
Cool. Well,
but
good talking with you today, man.
yeah, you too.
Um,
Anything amazing coming up you want to tell me about?
mm, I got, more courses and stuff coming out soon. Gospel passing chords
No babies or
courses.
anything?
No babies. I want another one.
You do?
Yeah, I do. I really do. Man, I love
You'll have
kids.
3 at that point.
Yeah, you're about to have 3.
I am, yeah. October
Yeah,
27th,
that's cool, man.
number
That's cool.
3. I can't say
Yeah.
the name. I can't say the gender because I have no idea what the gender is. We did not want
Are
to
y'all
find out.
waiting until the day of?
Day of, baby.
Whoa,
Yep.
boy,
So,
that's.
yeah,
I
we're
guess maybe
excited.
that's what we should do next time to be
You should, man.
surprised. Like treat it like the old days,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
old
That's
fashioned
what we're
days.
doing this for the 3rd. And the name, it's the same name regardless. I'm excited to tell you one day. So, we're not even telling our closest people, so don't feel left out.
Okay,
We
all right,
barely told
cool.
each other. So, I
y'all,
finally,
whis-
yeah, I
y'all
finally convinced.
whispered it to each
Yeah,
other.
yeah. I finally convinced her to use the same name for both, and she was like, "Yeah." I said, "It has to be because it's such a perfect name for both male or female." So I think
Oh,
you'll like
okay,
it.
cool.
I think you'll
That's
like it.
cool. That's cool.
Yeah, man.
All right, dude.
Well, I know you have a student coming up, but yeah, there's other things coming up on the channel. I did a rehearsal video where I talked about rehearsals. David has 2 videos coming up. Do you remember what those are about?
Not a clue.
Okay, well, they'll be out soon. And anyway, we're just excited that you're a part of this channel and a part of this community and this family of Worship Leader Hangout. Um, and yeah, just never stop learning. and never stop applying yourself. And yeah, just make God first in everything that you do. And we thank you so much for watching, subscribing, and being a part of this. And remember, great worship leaders are always learning.
Always learning.
Yes, they
See you
are.
guys.
All right, we'll see you later.